is this person? That's the great mystery of ELBAF right now, because Oda's treating their identity like top secret classified information, but now that we know that they are here on ELBAF, I do think I might have finally found the answer that we've all been waiting for. But on top of that, Luffy has also made a dark secret promise that might put his entire crew in danger and actually could even cost one of them their lives. Plus, I've also found some deep secret lore about this mysterious narrator box quote here that you will 100% want to hear. It's a long, cool chapter, but first we simply must talk about the mysterious figure stalking through the forest, because once again, Oda is teasing this person as a major player for this entire arc. Like seriously, I'm not even kidding. Have we ever seen a person silhouetted this much? I mean, obviously Emu, but who is this mysterious person that Oda wants to hide their identity not once, not twice, but now 3 different times? And as you could imagine, the entire One Piece community has been going absolutely crazy with speculation about this person. And so I want to break down the 2 most likely candidates at this point, and there are a few distinct features here that we do have to keep in mind. First, they appear to be wearing a kasa hat, which is a woven Japanese-style straw hat, very similar to the ones made in Wano. So right off the get-go, they possibly do have some connection to Wano, but besides just that, we do know that they like to drink, and they have a somewhat spiky hair, which I know isn't exactly a ton to go off of, but one of the biggest clues I think about this person's identity came in the cover page of chapter 631. Now, you might already know this, but on this panel you can clearly see a person who does very strongly match the characteristics that we've just laid out. Kasa hat? Check. Drinking? Check. Spiky hair? Also check. So this does seem to be the very same person, and since they are here drinking with the former Pirate King's Dr. Crocus, then this person does seem to be an old acquaintance of the Raja Pirates, or at the very least of Crocus. And so I think we can pretty safely also add a connection to the Raja Pirates as extra evidence to our list as well. And to me, that really leaves us with 2 known characters that are prime candidates to be this mystery man here, both with strong connections to the Raja Pirates, because first, we have the Golden Lion Shiki, and second, the former 3rd in command of the Raja Pirates and an absolute channel favorite at this point, Scalper Gaban. And no worries, I'm gonna absolutely break down why I think that Scalper Gaban is just such a great candidate in just a few moments, but first I want to look at the admittedly quite insane evidence supporting the idea that this is indeed Shiki here. Now, basically everything that we know about Shiki so far comes from sources outside of the main manga story. However, we have been told on a few occasions that Shiki was a former member of the notorious Rocks Pirates, and we also do know that he was present at the legendary Battle of God Valley. And that's basically already it from the manga though, so now to really find Shiki's wild connections to ELBAF, we do have to take a look at the One Piece movie Strong World and the special manga Chapter 0 that came out along with it. So, the first major connection I see comes from the monstrous animals that were revealed in chapter 1131. These massive creatures have apparently been the cursed Prince Loki's companions for a very long time, but if you look into Strong World and the concept art that was released for it, you might notice that every single one of these animals was actually part of Shiki's experiments during that movie. And not just Loki's animals, but also the deer that the other giant prince hunted down right here, and also this super long shark in the water outside of ELBAF as well. So clearly to me, Shiki does have some connections to ELBAF and the last few chapters in particular, since he got so many of his animals from the movie from this island it seems. But what's even crazier though is that we have even more evidence that this person is actually Shiki, because just look at Shiki's design here straight from the movie. I mean, there are a few very obvious things to point out here that connect to the figure in the cover page. I mean, just look at this. There's the very clearly similar yellow striped coat, the golden spiky hair, and if you look even closer, you'll notice that this person drinking with Crocus has sleeves and pants that are a very similar color to Shiki's shirt and pants as well. So really, if this person drinking with Crocus is the same as our mystery man right here, the evidence is really pointing towards it being Shiki, and obviously that has been a very common theory for a long time. Which, I mean, I gotta admit, it would just be insane because I honestly never thought we'd actually get to see Shiki in the main story anymore, but if it actually is him, then that is some terrible news for ELBAF and the Straw Hats because, as we've already established, he is extremely powerful with his legendary Float Devil Fruit that literally lets him lift entire islands. Oh yeah, and he basically wants to conquer the entire world, so sound like any other characters we were recently introduced to in ELBAF? I don't know, maybe the battle-crazed, stupidly powerful cursed prince who murdered his own father, allegedly. And I gotta say, after seeing all of these connections, I did think that it would be a good idea to look back at Strong World to see what other clues we could potentially get from this. So for those of you who need to get a reminder or just have never seen the movie, which I say why, it basically goes something like this. The events of the movie are roughly set in the time between Thriller Bark and Sabaody, and the general plotline goes a little bit like this. Shiki is planning to bring down the world government all by himself with an army of super powerful and very aggressive artificially evolved animals. And then after showing off his powers to the Marines, Shiki encounters the Straw Hats, finds out that Nami is an incredibly skilled navigator, and then kidnaps her to try and get her to join his crew. Now, of course, you could imagine that the Straw Hats don't super like that plan, so they do make their way up to his floating islands, battle his army of enhanced animals, and eventually take down the one-time rival of the former Pirate King. And then supposedly after that, he was captured by the Marines, but we already know for a fact that he escaped Impel Down once in the past before. In fact, we do see exactly how he was previously captured in the special chapter 0 that I mentioned earlier. By the way, if you haven't, I absolutely recommend reading or watching the anime version because in this special extra chapter, we learned that Shiki once had the largest pirate fleet ever to exist and was so close to defeating Gold Roger. So close, in fact, that he probably would have just succeeded if it hadn't been for a random freak storm. However, we also learned that Shiki had a ton of respect for Roger, so after Roger turned himself into the world government, Shiki actually assaulted Marineford, demanding for them to release Roger. I guess he didn't know that that was all part of Roger's plan. Oops. But he was then only defeated by a tag team version of Prime Garp and Prime Sengoku, which once again just goes to show Shiki's insane power in his prime as well, which is how he ended up in Impel Down, where he later escaped, the first person to ever do so. So I guess that he'd need another prison escape now if he's gonna show up again in the main storyline, but then again, the events of the movie are technically non-canon, so Oda might just completely choose to ignore the fact and have him just straight up show up regardlessly. But yeah, all of this is the basis for what we know about Shiki so far. And again, I totally understand if you're saying that the One Piece movies aren't a part of the official story, and for the most part you're correct. However, Strong World is kind of a bit of an exception here because it was actually written by Oda himself, which most of the movies surprisingly are not. So even though all the events are not part of the official storyline, I think we can pretty safely say that the things that we learned about Shiki here are true, and he is an official character that has now officially also appeared in the story. Which means that if Luffy doesn't fulfill his secret promise to Loki, which no worries, we will be discussing in depth in just a few moments, then I could easily see someone like Shiki doing just that in his stead and teaming up with Loki to cause some real next level destruction and mayhem. I mean, they could even frame Luffy for the act, which would set up an even juicier conflict with the Giants of ELBAF here. Which I know, at this point, it kind of sounds like I'm all on board for Team Shiki here for the identity of this mysterious person, but I would only say that I'm about halfway onto that train because personally, I would love it if this turned out to be my man, the legend Scopper Gaban. Because out of all the former Roger pirates, he is the one guy that we've been waiting to show up for the longest time now. I mean, he was the third in command, and there's also the fact that the former Roger pirates have all been spread out throughout the Grand Line to kind of guide the next person to become Pirate King, who is the next Joy Boy. Again, quickly, in case you don't know my theory here, which I've had for a long time, the idea is that Crocus was at the very start of the Grand Line, telling Luffy about, Laugh Tale and giving them the log post, then Rayleigh, the second in command, in the very middle, quoting the the ships to go into the new world. So it would make a lot of sense, I think, that Gaban would show up towards the very end of the Grand Line, which ELBAF certainly fits that description, I would say. However, if this is actually Scopper Gaban, then we do have a lot to learn about him because, well, all we basically know is that he was third in command and that he loves to bash enemies around with his dual-wielding axe in battle. That is literally all we know, but even with that being said, it would still be extremely hyped to actually see him show up here. I mean, just look at how much Rayleigh trained and influenced Luffy, and I would expect something very similar from Scopper Gaban, especially because he knows the secrets of the One Piece treasure just as well as Rayleigh or Roger did. Just thinking here for a second on what he could teach Luffy, it could be something like the secret to damaging the Gorosei in their demon form, since Luffy actually wasn't really able to do that at the end of Egghead, or he could teach him more secrets about his Gear 5th Nika transformation, or who knows, even just help him level up his haki in general to get to an even higher level closer to Shanks. But can you tell that I'm kind of excited about this guy? I mean, how cool would it be to just have this short little training arc with Scopper Gaban out of all people on the Island of Giants on ELBAF. Now, all things considered though, I would say that Shiki and Scopper Gaban do seem like they would be the two most likely candidates, unless of course Oda is going to introduce a completely brand new character that we've just never seen before. But if that were to be the case, then why keep him in silhouettes for such a long time? Like seriously, it's still nagging my brain just how many times Oda has been hiding this character at this point. So, I mean, they have to be someone super crazy important. In fact, one person that I haven't brought up yet is of course once again the man marked by flames, who could very well be this character as well. I mean, we do know that they're important and Oda has been hyping them up more and more throughout the end of Wano and Egghead Island, so it would make a lot of sense for them to show up at this point. Of course, we do know that the man marked by flames also seems to hold the key to finding the One Piece, considering that they are rumored to have the final missing road poneglyph. So if this is that person, them showing up could be a massive boost for the Straw Hats, because it already seemed like this person was kind of anticipating that the Straw Hats are coming here, so maybe they're coming to give the Straw Hats the final road poneglyph without any struggle. That honestly seems a little bit too easy, I think you would probably agree, and I really can't imagine Oda would end the search for the final road poneglyph like that, like just some dude walking up and being like, there you go, take it, good luck. So if this really is the man marked by flames, I do have to imagine that there would be at least a little bit more to them than just handing over the poneglyph and then, like, you know, vanishing again. Of course, Blackbeard and his crew could always complicate things by showing up and coming after this person as well, but again, we just have no idea at this point. I really want to know though. Also, just quickly throwing it out there, even though I just released a full-on video about this if you want to watch that, but the man marked by flames could very well even be Shiki or Scopper Gaban. But what's even crazier, I think, is the idea that this mysterious person could theoretically be someone from the distant past. That's right, I'm talking Void Century past. Confused? No problem, because that's what I'm here for. Because remember how I mentioned that the Kasa hat that this person appears to be wearing reminds me a lot of the Amigasa village in Wano. Well, what if this person didn't just visit Wano? What if they are from Wano, but the Wano from the distant past? Now, of course, that would be impossible unless we had some sort of, I don't know, time-traveling devil fruit. Oh, wait, we do have that, because Toki's powers can literally send people forward into the future. I mean, think about it. Toki is also originally from the Wano of the distant past, so that connection checks out with the Kasa hat as well. I mean, I told you, it's a crazy idea, but still, I kind of like it. I've liked the idea for a long time that Toki sends someone ahead into the future as well to meet with Luffy, because if Joy Boy knew when exactly the next Joy Boy would appear, then Toki probably knew as well. So I just hope we see someone from the Void Century just pop up because Toki transported them there like 800 years ago. Okay, but let's stop. Hold on a second. I mean, that's a ton of insane speculation, admittedly, here about this figure that we know very little to nothing about. So let's now shift back our focus to the chapter a little bit more, because oh, what? Luffy and Loki made a promise off screen? Okay, so we now have a really interesting setup here with the possibility that Luffy might actually free Loki, as we talked about. Bad guy Luffy incoming. Seriously though, we don't exactly know what kind of promise these two made, but we can make some pretty good guesses about what the promise is and what it means for both Luffy and Loki. And I gotta say, as always, reading the chapter in the original Japanese just uncovers so many hidden levels and meanings that just get completely lost in the English translation, I think. I often get asked how I managed to get fluent in Japanese, and while it took me over 6 years of studying to get to this point, I probably could have gotten here way faster with the right tool, which I want to share with you guys today, as I actually managed to convince them to sponsor today's video, the Migaku language platform. Hands down, this is the best language learning tool that I have ever used, and the only one actually I'm using right now every day as part of my morning routine to improve my own Japanese. Now, someone who has literally gone through every single possible type of study method, from textbooks to kanji writing to handwritten flashcards, this is the real deal, which is why I reached out to work with them and not the other way around. It runs as a Chrome browser extension that allows you to make cards from online articles, from Netflix videos, from YouTube videos, adding the audio and the exact sentence from your favorite anime or YouTuber, and you can then even make cards by taking a picture of a word out in the real world, which I absolutely love as well. The app also picks sentences for you with exactly one unknown word, and it also teaches you Japanese pitch accent, which has made my speaking skills literally go through the roof. And it has a bunch of other really crazy features that I can't all squeeze into this one ad read, but the best thing, Migaku doesn't only come for Japanese, but for a ton of different languages, including beginner-friendly courses that pretty much cover everything from writing system to essential grammar that will have you reading manga in no time. So unironically, if you want to learn a new language, sign up with Migaku today, and they're giving you, my viewers, an exclusive free month with their subscription, or 30% of the lifetime plan that includes all languages. So go check them out in the description, and now back to the chapter. Now, if we look back at the last chapter, we have ended the Luffy and Loki conversation with Luffy asking if Shanks was an ELBAF, and Loki responding that he wouldn't just give out this information for free. So naturally, this makes the most sense for the basis of that promise. Luffy wants to know about Shanks and if he's still here, and Loki wants to, well, get free from his chain. So in exchange for Luffy getting the key, Loki will tell Luffy about Shanks and what he's been doing here. Or maybe Luffy is just trying to be the genuinely good guy and help the giant prince out. Now, of course, there is a big chance that Loki probably isn't even going to tell Luffy anything, even if Luffy does follow through with his side of the promise, but it does set the stage for a really interesting plotline with Luffy having a secret mission. And of course, Loki potentially being in his debt. And what makes this even more possible is that Luffy is already being a little bit of a bad guy by keeping his meeting with Loki a secret, even though he was straight up asked by the two giants right here. Which I gotta say was honestly pretty un-Luffy-ish, if you ask me. I mean, he's usually such a straightforward, honest character and just says whatever he wants, because what are people gonna do about it? So the fact that he's actually trying to keep his promise to Loki a secret also gives us some serious clues to analyze as well, I think. So first off, when Luffy first met Loki and during their whole conversation, we already wondered in previous chapter reviews if Loki was actually a good guy or not. And based on Luffy's whole interaction with the so-called cursed prince, we weren't actually 100% sure this guy was so bad. However, we do know that Luffy usually has a really good sense of a person's true intentions, so since he was having a long conversation with Loki, it did seem like this guy might not be all evil after all. At least that's the conclusion that I came to. And this promise with Loki is even more evidence, I think, to support that theory. I mean, would Luffy make a promise with someone that he could sense was a bad guy with bad intentions, and even go so far as to lie to friendly giants about it? Honestly, it's kind of hard for me to believe that, so I'm more leaning into the direction that Loki might be in the good guy camp, or at least in the neutral guy doing his kind of own thing camp. But that being said, there is one big question in all of this, because we do know that Loki has some strange sort of eye powers, since his eyes have literally been glowing and tied up, so there's certainly a possibility that Loki has tricked Luffy with some sort of psychic abilities that we just don't know about yet. Just how I'm using my psychic powers to remind you that you can sign up for my Patreon, where you can access a ton of bonus video content, including early chapter reviews and all of my team's incredible artwork, linked below. But it looks like we're gonna still have to wait and find out though about what Loki's true powers really are, but the best part about this whole secret promise is what it sets up for the upcoming chapters, of course. Because if Luffy's going to keep this secret and fulfill his undercover mission, it is going to cause some major issues for him and the entire crew. And that's because, as we see in this chapter, after the weird giant road got a super satisfying beatdown, we finally get the reunion between both Luffy and Nami's group, plus the entire rest of the crew that was still going with Dory and Broggy on the really awesome looking Rainbow Bridge. I mean, that looks absolutely fantastic, and also, sorry, doesn't seem like we're getting a separate crew narrative, at least right now. I will say, why split them up then in the first place? Maybe just to have Luffy meet Loki? I don't know, don't ask me. And don't worry, because we'll also be talking more about the insanely cool rainbow painter stones in just a few moments. By this point, we now finally know that the entire crew plus the giants are going to Dory and Broggy's village up on the middle level of ELBAF, apparently called the Sun Level. And as we saw in the last chapter, Luffy's friend, the giant Prince Hyrogin, is planning a feast to welcome his friends to the island. So what I'm now kind of expecting to see here in the next few chapters is an enormous party to welcome the Straw Hats to ELBAF, and then, during all the partying and drinking, Luffy might actually go and sneak off to try and find that mysterious key in order to free Loki, which then could end up in just a ton of different outcomes. I mean, Luffy could obviously just succeed and then sneak back to free Loki, which would be really cool, honestly. Kind of want to have that outcome, but honestly, I really just want this to happen just to see Loki free and all of the chaos that would cause and his power, because I really want to know. But of course, that would most likely make Luffy a direct enemy of the giants and then lead to some other super juicy conflict as a result. Now, that being said, on the other hand, we also all know that Luffy isn't exactly the super sneaky type, so he could very likely also just fail to find that key, and this is honestly where I think that the giant kid Colin, who we will talk about more also at the end of this review, could come into play as well. Because with Colin, we have a character who is looking for Luffy and will probably just trust this guy right away. So maybe Colin will be the one to help Luffy find the key. Or, to make things worse, he could do really the exact opposite and reveal that Luffy is trying to free Loki, which could then lead to Luffy going to giant jail, I guess. Which, let's be honest, I'm not a major fan of, because he's been in jail a lot the last few major arcs like Whole Cake Island and Wano. So I wouldn't be surprised one bit to see the same thing happen here, but if it does happen though, it could be up to the crew to free him, and finally perhaps my boy Usopp's time to shine as well. I mean, come on, how cool would it be to have a gladiator type gauntlet with the crew fighting to save Luffy, as long as no one dies. Looking at you, Usopp, Mr. Brave Warrior of the Sea, I need you to stay alive for a while longer. Before we get too ahead of ourselves, you know, let's back up a little bit, because there is some other super important information that we're kind of completely skipping over here. Because I gotta say, unfortunately, so far at least, the 9 realms theory that we had seems officially debunked with the reveal of the 3 levels of ELBAF. Starting at the bottom, we of course have the underworld, which, as we've seen, is a frozen wasteland full of supersized giant animals and is meant to keep prisoners captured. Which, now that I think about it, is that the smartest place, since it's right next to the ocean where people can just leave? But hey. Then moving up, we have the first layer of branches where we have the Sun World, which it seems is where most of the giants live in massive villages spread out on the different branches of this stupidly big tree. Actually, I quickly want to stop it here, because it really does seem like there could be entirely different fractions of giants in ELBAF. Because while the village that the Straw Hats visit is the village of Dory and Broggy, and it does seem Hyrogin as well, though I could be wrong here, that still leaves a ton of other enormous giant villages that could have completely different beliefs and politics as well. And while I'm not 100% sure about that, there is still a pretty good chance, I think, that not every group of giants will be friends with the Straw Hats right away. It would also be a little bit boring, right? But moving up now from the Sun World, we then have the Heaven World way up high in the top of the tree above the clouds, which honestly has me crazy excited, because I mean, we're just gonna have to go up there, right? You know, like, please tell me that we're gonna go up there. I still need my fix of elves in this arc, and if there's any place they could still be, the Heaven World just seems like the absolute perfect fit. Although, that doesn't have to be the case. I mean, it could simply be where the giant royal family lives, for instance. Although, if that were true, then why isn't Hyrogin going up there? I mean, the Heaven World could also, of course, be something unrelated to giants as well. Perhaps it could be the location of Burka, which, in case you don't gonna remember is the sky island that Enel destroyed. The people that once lived there have wings just like angels, so it would make sense that they live up in the so-called heaven area. Or perhaps it is home to some Lunarians. Now, obviously not really sure at this point. I just really have to imagine that we will be going there before the arc is done, rather sooner than later. Now, of course, the most beautiful scene from this chapter also showed us exactly how the giants travel between different levels. And who would have guessed they do travel on rainbows, which is just absolutely awesome if you ask me. But it does bring up a lot of questions about these painter sunstones that were first mentioned by Hyrojin 2 chapters ago. Because I'm not sure about you, but I didn't expect them that they would literally use the stones to paint a rainbow. I have like so many questions about this. Like, what are these stones? How do they make solid rainbows? Is it kind of like the sky islands, the clouds there? I'm sure that we'll find out more about this later on, but for now I'm kind of wondering if they are somehow the product of a devil fruit power that exists in ELBAF, because this is like truly a step beyond other weird weather and geographical phenomena that we've seen in One Piece before. And yeah, sure, we have like knock-up streams and solid clouds that people can live on, but rainbows that you can paint from a stone, that does seem a little bit too magical to not be the result of some crazy devil fruit power, at least in my opinion. I might be completely wrong in this. Regardless though, I'm really excited to see how these stones could be used in the future. I mean, the possibilities here are literally endless as long as they can be used outside of ELBAF as well. I mean, just think about Usopp, if he survives, who could surely use these as part of his arsenal, just like he adopted the dials from Skypiea, right? I'm just kind of like picturing him shooting out rainbows for the crew to escape on, or maybe even making bridges up into the sky that the Thousand Sunny can then travel on as well. Seriously, how cool and overpowered would all that be as a power? Like, on a bigger scale though, I also wonder if these painter stones could help save people from a massive disaster like a world-ending flood that could happen. So yeah, super excited to see how these will impact the future of the story, and they better do, because otherwise that would be such a waste introducing them here. Okay, but now we finally get to the part of the chapter that is one of the most interesting for me personally, because all throughout the second half of chapter 1132, we do get numerous narrator boxes which tell us about a quote written by the explorer called Louis Arnott from one of the most fascinating in-world One Piece books. And the reason I'm so excited about this is that it seems that Oda has been setting up this explorer guy for over 1,000 chapters, and his book surprisingly shows up all the way back in Little Garden, plus the flashback to the island of Ohara. Now you can of course go and read the full quote in the chapter, but I'm gonna break this down and see what we can actually learn here, because it is obviously very important for the future of the ELBAF arc. That seems for sure. First off, Arnott, or Arnott, not personally sure how to say his name correctly, but I'm just gonna go with Arnott, describes the breathtaking view of ELBAF and how no words can actually do the view of the island any justice. Which, I mean, fair point, agreed. Then he goes on to mention the size of the animals and plants here, but here is where we get to the interesting stuff, because he says specifically, fellow explorer, the time you will spend here will not be fruitless, which I mean, like, okay, when I first read this quote, I was thinking about that last word fruitless a lot. I mean, are you thinking what I'm thinking? Devil fruits? Could ELBAF truly be the home of devil fruits? Possibly, but there's really not that much to go on here right now until we get to the end, where Arnott gives the readers a very strict warning. He says, I wish for you to remember my words somewhere in the back of your mind. Do not prolong your stay in this land for too long. Which I gotta say is a very mysterious and super ominous message. I mean, what exactly does that mean? A warning of some sort? But why? Why should people not stay here long? And well, I think I might have found an answer, but to get there, let's first explain who Louis Arnott actually is and where we've seen his writing before in the story, because it might actually shock you to learn just how old this person actually is. You see, Arnott was an explorer whose writings were included in the One Piece book Bragman, which we were first introduced to when Nami used it to learn more about the island of Little Garden. However, what's most interesting is that Bragman is not not just a book about Little Garden, as Oda once answered a fan question by explaining that it is a collection of stories from explorers in the past about their travels throughout the One Piece worlds. Oda even says that most people would consider it to be a book of lies and that the Straw Hats' travels will let readers view the contents of the book for themselves. So basically, like, the crew is living out the stories of that book somehow. What is most interesting though is that we might actually have a good idea of when this book was created as well. And that's because if Louis Arnold wrote that ELBAF contained giants, then that means that he must have only visited the island less than 100 years ago, since that was when Dory and Broggy first came to Little Garden. And we can even narrow it down a little bit further because the next time we see this book is actually at the famous library of Ohara, which was tragically burned down about 22 years ago. So that means that the book here was created somewhere between 22 and 100 years ago, which means that Louis Arnott must have traveled the world sometime during that span. Which admittedly doesn't give us a whole lot of clues, but at least we do know that this book wasn't written like centuries ago. It is actually a fairly modern book in the history of the world. Now, you might be wondering at this point where I'm going with this. Why does any of this matter? Who cares about some old book in the One Piece world? Well, as an official Ohara scholar, I care. And you should actually too, because with all that we've just discussed so far, we might actually be able to give a few credible options for who actually wrote this thing. And no, I don't think it is the mysterious figure that we see at the end of this chapter, just getting ahead of that if that's what you thought. So instead, just think about it. This person is clearly not a giant since they're describing ELBAF as a normal-sized person. On top of that, they have traveled far and wide around the world to catch them. No, not to catch. Well, he even reached the most dangerous part of the Grand Line by sailing all the way to ELBAF. So who are the very few characters who we know of that actually did that during the time frame that we already laid out? Well, there are of course two that I can think of right away. Roger and Rox. These two certainly fit the timeline and were the two most famous pirates of the time. And we already know that Roger sailed all the way around the world once, and it would make sense if his greatest rival Rox did probably the same thing. Now, I'm not trying to say here that Arnold is like a fake pen name for either Roger or Rox, but it could have been someone on their crew who actually wrote their journal. However, if it wasn't one of these two characters, then let's look at this from a different angle maybe, because we do know that the book is considered to be full of lies, and since Usopp is the greatest liar, or you could say bragger, that we know of, then it would make a lot of sense if Arnold was somehow related to Usopp, like maybe his grandfather or even a distant relative. And I think for now that's about all that we've got as for their identity, but that still leaves us with the much more interesting question of why give people a warning about staying too long in ELBAF? Like, what could be so bad about staying in the land of the giants for, like, a little while? Well, based on this quote, I think we can assume that the danger is related to time. So I do wonder if the danger is that time passes more quickly on ELBAF, or maybe even just that if you aren't careful, you can end up spending way too much time here than you originally thought. I mean, that would make a little bit of sense since the giants are long-lived and they probably don't view time the same way that regular people do, so maybe if the Straw Hats aren't careful enough, they might be stuck in ELBAF for way longer than they originally planned to. I kind of like this option, but on the other hand, perhaps there is some actual real physical danger that results from staying on ELBAF too long as well. And just to throw some ideas out there, maybe staying on ELBAF makes you grow into a giant as well, or perhaps the different giants on the island will eventually come to find you and try to fight you, which I could very much imagine that you're just part of the fighting culture, the war culture there. After all, it is a rule that foreigners in general are not allowed into ELBAF, so by going there, you're kind of already breaking the rules. And that would be the simplest answer, but personally, I do hope it's a little bit more than that. Perhaps Arnold was even worried about Loki, since it is possible that Arnold visited the island when Loki was alive and caused chaos. But whatever the danger is, the Straw Hats might need someone to save them from that danger, and I can think about one person perfect for that job, Shanks, who we are already expecting to make an appearance during this arc anyways, but what probably shocked most people about this chapter the most was that we actually got some Shanks action, but not in the way that we're usually all hoping for, if you get my drift. Because right at the start of the chapter, we're introduced to the giant kid here called Cullen. Colin, who was the kid in the bar that Shanks visited back in chapter 1176. Apparently, this kid is a massive Shanks fanboy, we know someone else, and even wanted to join his crew, just like Luffy. But what we didn't know is that Shanks actually left Colin with a special message. He told Colin to not forget the name Straw Hat Luffy, which is pretty fascinating on its own. Won't you agree? Like, we all have been thinking for a long time, is Shanks still a good guy and Luffy's friend? Or is he gonna be like some serious rival for Luffy? But if he's actively encouraging people to look out for Luffy, then to me that still means he's gonna be Luffy's ally, right? Kinda gives me vibes of Shanks telling Rayleigh and Mihawk about Luffy as well, so it may actually just be the case that he hasn't changed all that much at all despite his renewed desire to find the One Piece. But that of course just makes me wonder, who is this kid Colin? Will he have like a special role to play in the arc? I mean, his introduction 55 chapters ago was so similar to how Shanks treated Luffy. Colin even wanted to join Shanks' crew and the red-haired captain just laughed at him, just like he did to Luffy back in chapter 1. And so that kind of makes me think that this Colin will have a serious impact on the ELBAF story arc. Maybe he even has some unique power that we don't know about yet, or perhaps Colin will be the local person who makes a real connection with the Straw Hats, similar to, for example, Tama and Wano. And then we also have this new character that I mentioned named Ripley, who Colin is supposed to give food to, and we literally don't know anything about this person, but it does make me wonder if this kid is bringing food to Loki, which sounds insane, I know, but we don't really know how Loki has been getting fed all this time, and if we're talking about connections with Luffy, then it might make sense for Colin to meet up with Loki just like Luffy did. Or, I don't know, maybe Loki will just convince Colin to find the key even if Luffy doesn't, which would make a lot of sense as well, I think. Though nonetheless, it would of course be crazy, and maybe a little bit too crazy, so perhaps we're back to our mystery man at the end of the chapter being the one who actually releases Loki, whether it be Shiki, Gaban, the man marked by flames, or someone else. I can't wait to find out who they really are, but at this point it might be most interesting if it is actually the man marked by flames, since this person basically holds the key to the One Piece at this point with the final road poneglyph, and his presence would surely bring the Blackbeard pirates and possibly the world government to the island of ELBAF as well, which, you know, means one thing. We need to know who this person is, and we've already mentioned Shiki and Gaban, who could possibly be this person, man marked by flames, but there are actually a few other really important characters who I think fit everything that we know about this mysterious figure even better, and if you want to find out exactly who I think the man marked by flame is, you can watch that video right below me. As always, thanks so much for watching, and thanks to all my beautiful Patreon members out there. You guys really help out the channel, and yeah, really appreciate all of you, and of course, everyone who watches, engages, comments. Let me know what you think of the chapter, and I will see you in the next one.